Have you ever stopped for a moment and wondered what Earth actually looked like before humans ever existed? Not just a simple, empty world, but a completely different planet, so raw and powerful that it would be almost impossible for the human mind to imagine it today. In the earliest stage of Earth's existence, the planet was not calm, stable, or even close to habitable. It was a violent, unstable sphere of heat, energy, and constant transformation. There were no oceans stretching across the horizon, no green landscapes, no animals moving across the land, and absolutely no human presence. In fact, if you could somehow stand on that version of Earth, you would not even recognize it as a place meant for life. The surface was in a constant state of destruction and creation at the same time. Massive volcanic activity dominated the entire planet. Instead of solid ground that stays in place for thousands of years, the land itself was constantly being reshaped. Lava would burst out from deep inside the Earth, spreading across vast areas, burning everything in its path, and then slowly cooling only to be broken apart again by another eruption. It was not a peaceful cycle, but a never-ending process of chaos. And this raises a powerful question. If everything on Earth today feels so stable and permanent, how could the planet once have been this unstable and unpredictable? What kind of force was powerful enough to keep reshaping an entire world over and over again? The sky during this time was nothing like the blue atmosphere we see today. Instead, it was thick, heavy, and filled with dust, ash, and toxic gases released from constant volcanic eruptions. Sunlight struggled to reach the surface. When it did, it was often filtered through dense clouds, giving the sky a dark reddish or grayish glow. Imagine looking up and never seeing a clear sky, only moving layers of smoke and fire-like colors stretching endlessly. Temperatures were extreme beyond imagination. Some areas of the planet were so hot that rock existed in a molten state. Other regions were constantly shifting due to geological instability. Nothing stayed the same for long. Even the ground beneath would crack, shift, and reform. It was as if the entire planet was alive, but in a chaotic and uncontrollable way. And yet, despite this destructive environment, Earth was not dying. It was forming. Every eruption, every collision, every release of energy was slowly building the foundation of what would one day become a life-supporting planet. But at that stage, there was no sign that life would ever exist here. If you had looked at Earth from space, you would not have called it beautiful. You might have called it dangerous, unfinished, or even dead. Water, which we now see as the source of life, did not exist in stable form. Instead, it was trapped in vapor, constantly changing state due to extreme heat. Any attempt for liquid water to settle would have been temporary at best, instantly evaporating or being reshaped by the violent conditions of the surface. So another question naturally arises. How did something as stable as oceans ever come from such chaos? Even silence on early Earth would not feel peaceful. It would feel empty, heavy, and unsettling. The silence would only be broken by the roar of volcanoes, the shaking of the ground, and the violent movement of the atmosphere. It was not a quiet world. It was a world filled with constant natural force, as if the planet itself was still deciding what it wanted to become. This raises the biggest question of all. If Earth started in such a violent and unlivable state, how did it transform into the balanced, life-supporting world we know today? What changed so dramatically that a burning, unstable planet eventually became home to millions of species, including humans? The answer lies in time, transformation, and processes that took millions upon millions of years. But in this earliest scene of Earth's history, none of that future was visible. Only raw, powerful creation existed, shaping a world that had not yet become what it was meant to be. Ever looked at Earth and wondered how a planet that today looks so structured, so alive, and so perfectly balanced could once have been a completely violent and uncontrollable world? Met in a time when Earth was nothing like what we know today, a time when the entire surface was constantly changing, breaking, and rebuilding itself without any pause. This is not just a story of the past, but a phase in which the planet itself was still trying to define what it would eventually become. This early stage, Earth was dominated by extreme volcanic activity. The surface was not stable land, but a constantly shifting layer of molten rock. Massive eruptions were happening across different regions at the same time, releasing enormous amounts of lava, ash, and toxic gases into the environment. Instead of calm landscapes, the planet looked more like a burning, unstable surface where nothing could remain in one place for long. Rivers would flow endlessly, destroying anything in their path, only for new eruptions to reshape the same areas again and again. This cycle was not occasional. It was continuous, as if the planet was in a permanent state of creation and destruction. Here is the real question that makes this phase so fascinating. How could a planet survive such extreme chaos and still continue to form something stable over time? The atmosphere during this period was equally harsh and unrecognizable compared to today. There was no clean blue sky or breathable air. Instead, the sky was thick with volcanic ash, dust particles, and gases released from constant eruptions. Sunlight struggled to penetrate this dense layer, and when it did, it was heavily distorted, giving the entire sky a dark, reddish, or smoky appearance. Lightning storms were common, triggered by unstable atmospheric conditions, creating sudden flashes that illuminated the chaos below. It was not a peaceful sky, it was a restless and unpredictable one. Temperatures on the surface were extremely high, often reaching levels that made solid rock behave like liquid. This created an environment where stability simply could not exist for long. Any newly formed land was quickly reshaped or destroyed by heat and pressure. Earth was not yet a calm planet. It was still in its formation phase, where every process was intense and uncontrolled. Water, which is essential for life today, had no stable existence at this stage. Instead of forming oceans or rivers, water mostly existed in the atmosphere as vapor. Whenever it condensed and fell as rain, it often evaporated again upon reaching the extremely hot surface. This meant that even one of the most basic elements of life could not settle into a stable form. Another important question arises here. If water itself could not survive, how did oceans ever manage to form on such a hostile planet? Despite all this destruction, something very important was happening beneath the surface. Earth was slowly cooling over time, allowing the outer layer to begin stabilizing in certain areas. Each volcanic eruption, each shift in the crust, and each chemical reaction was contributing to a long-term transformation. It was a slow and gradual process, not visible within a human lifetime, but powerful enough to reshape an entire planet. Could observe Earth from space during this time, it would not look like a living world. It would appear as a burning sphere, covered in storms, glowing lava regions, and thick clouds of ash. There would be no sign of peace or stability, only constant motion and energy. Yet beneath this violent appearance, the foundation of a future habitable planet was being formed. This raises a final thought. Was this chaos just destruction, or was it actually the necessary beginning of everything we know today? Ever thought about one of the biggest mysteries of our planet? Where did all the water on Earth actually come from? We see oceans covering most of the planet today, but if you go far enough back in time, Earth was nothing like this. There were no calm blue seas, no rivers flowing through valleys, and no rain feeding the land. Instead, there was only a young, extremely hot planet slowly trying to cool down, and in that process, something extraordinary began to happen. Earth was far too hot to hold liquid water on its surface. Any water that tried to exist could not remain stable. It would immediately turn into vapor due to the extreme heat rising from the planet's interior. So in the beginning, water did not exist as oceans or lakes. It existed in the atmosphere as invisible steam, flowing around in a thick, unstable environment filled with volcanic gases. This raises an important question. If water could not exist in liquid form, then how did oceans ever begin to form? In the past, the planet slowly started to cool. This cooling process was not quick. It took millions of years. But even this gradual change was enough to begin one of the most important transformations in Earth's history. When the surface temperature started dropping, water vapor in the atmosphere began to condense. This means it started turning from gas into liquid droplets, leading to the formation of extremely heavy and continuous rainfall. This was not a normal rain like we experience today. It was something far more intense and unmatchable. It's believed that it rained on early Earth for thousands of years without stopping. The sky would have been filled with thick clouds, constantly releasing water onto the surface. But here comes another fascinating question. If it rained so heavily, why didn't Earth immediately become stable oceans like we see today? It lies in the temperature of the ground itself. Even though the atmosphere was cooling, the surface was still extremely hot in many regions due to ongoing volcanic activity. So whenever rain fell, it often evaporated again almost instantly upon touching the ground. This created a continuous cycle where water was constantly appearing and disappearing, unable to settle into stable bodies of water. It was a planet caught between fire and water, unable to fully allow either to dominate. Over time, something remarkable began to change. The intensity of volcanic activity slowly reduced in certain areas. The crust of the Earth began to stabilize in patches, forming low-lying basins and deeper regions. These natural depressions eventually started collecting water faster than it could evaporate. This was the beginning of something that would completely transform the planet, the formation of the first oceans. Here, another question arises. Were these early oceans anything like the ones we see today? The answer is no. They were likely extremely hot, chemically different, and constantly influenced by volcanic gases dissolving into them. These primitive oceans were not peaceful blue waters. They were dynamic, unstable, and still part of a planet in transition. Yet they became one of the most crucial foundations for life. Makes this phase even more fascinating is the idea that water, something we now consider ordinary, was once one of the most difficult and unstable elements on Earth. It had to fight against heat, volcanic activity, and atmospheric chaos just to exist in a stable form. So the real question becomes this. If Earth struggled so much just to create oceans, how did it eventually become a planet capable of supporting life itself? The stage of Earth's history reminds us that nothing we see today was instant or simple. Every ocean, every drop of water, and every stable environment is the result of millions of years of transformation, where chaos slowly turned into balance, and destruction slowly gave birth to life-supporting stability. Have you ever wondered what the very first form of life on Earth actually looked like? Not humans, not animals, not even plants, but something so small that it cannot be seen with the naked eye, something so simple that it barely seems alive at all. If Earth began as a violent, burning planet and slowly transformed into oceans and stable land, then at what exact moment did life decide to appear? And more importantly, why did it appear at all in such a harsh environment? After the formation of early oceans, Earth was still far from the peaceful blue planet we know today. The water was hot, chemically active, and filled with dissolved minerals from volcanic activity. Deep beneath the ocean surface, there were regions where heat and pressure created unique chemical environments. It is in these hidden, extreme conditions that scientists believe the earliest forms of life may have begun. Here is the most fascinating part. This life was not anything like what we imagine today. There were no complex organisms, no fish, no plants, and no visible creatures moving through the water. Instead, life likely began as microscopic, single-celled organisms. These were so small that billions of them could exist in a single drop of water, completely invisible to the human eye. So the real question is, how can something so simple become the foundation of everything alive on Earth today? These early life forms did not need sunlight or oxygen in the way modern life does. In fact, the early Earth atmosphere contained very little oxygen. Instead, these organisms survived by absorbing chemicals from their environment, especially in deep ocean regions where volcanic activity released energy-rich compounds. This process is believed to be one of the first steps in biological evolution, where chemistry slowly transitioned into biology. One of the most likely places where life could have started is near hydrothermal vents, cracks on the ocean floor where extremely hot, mineral-rich water flows out from beneath the Earth's crust. Around these vents, conditions were harsh, with high temperatures and pressure, yet they provided the exact chemical energy needed for simple life to form. This leads to a powerful question. Why would life begin in the most extreme and dangerous places on the planet instead of calm and safe environments? Over time, these microscopic organisms began to reproduce and slowly adapt to their surroundings. They did not think or move in the way animals do, but they had the ability to survive, multiply, and respond to chemical changes. This simple ability to persist became the foundation of all biological evolution that followed. From these tiny beginnings, life gradually became more complex over millions of years. What makes this stage even more incredible is the idea that every living thing today, including humans, can trace its origin back to these microscopic organisms. Every forest, every animal, every human being is connected to that earliest form of life that existed silently in the ancient oceans. But this raises an even deeper question. If life began so simply, was it just a chemical accident, or was it an inevitable result of Earth's conditions? Even today, scientists are still studying this mystery. No one can say with absolute certainty exactly how life first appeared. There are theories, evidence, and strong scientific models, but the exact moment when non-living matter became living remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in science. And so, this scene of Earth's history is not just about the beginning of life. It is about the beginning of possibility itself. From invisible organisms in dark oceans to the complex world we see today, everything started from something so small that it almost seems impossible to believe. Have you ever imagined standing on Earth billions of years ago and realizing that everything around you is completely silent, not because nothing exists, but because nothing complex has arrived yet? No humans, no animals walking on land, no birds in the sky, and no forests covering the surface. Just a young planet that has finally cooled down enough to exist in a more stable form, yet still far from the vibrant world we know today. The question that naturally arises is this: if Earth already had oceans and early microscopic life, why did it still take so long for a visible world to appear? In this stage of Earth's history, the planet had entered a relatively calmer phase compared to its violent beginnings. Volcanoes were still active, but not as globally destructive as before. Oceans had formed and covered large portions of the surface, and the atmosphere had begun to stabilize slowly. Yet, despite all of this progress, the planet was still in what we can call a silent world phase. This silence does not mean emptiness. It means life was present, but not visible in forms we easily recognize. The oceans were the main stage of activity during this time. Deep beneath the surface, microscopic life continued to evolve and multiply. These tiny organisms were the foundation of everything that would come later. But if life already existed in the oceans, why did it remain hidden for so long without evolving into more complex forms? The answer lies in time and environmental stability. Earth needed millions of years of consistent conditions before life could begin to grow beyond its simplest form. During this period, oxygen levels in the atmosphere were extremely low. This meant that complex organisms, which depend on oxygen for survival, simply could not exist yet. The planet had to go through a long biological transformation before it could support anything larger than microscopic life. Another important factor was competition and survival. Early life forms were focused only on survival and reproduction at the most basic level. They did not have complex structures, nervous systems, or mobility. Because of this, evolution was extremely slow. Life was experimenting with itself in countless ways, trying different biological paths, but most of these early forms remained simple for a very long time. This brings up a powerful question. Why does evolution take such an incredibly long time to create complexity, even when life already exists? Over time, small changes in environment, chemistry, and atmospheric composition began to push life forward. One of the most important turning points was the gradual increase of oxygen in the oceans and atmosphere. This oxygen was not originally present in large amounts, but certain microscopic organisms slowly began producing it as a byproduct of their biological processes. This change, although extremely slow, completely transformed the future of life on Earth. As oxygen levels increased, new possibilities for life began to emerge. Organisms that could use oxygen for energy became more efficient and more complex over time. This set the stage for the evolution of multicellular life, which would eventually lead to plants, animals, and all visible ecosystems. But even in this calm phase, Earth was still unpredictable. Natural changes, temperature shifts, and geological activity continued to influence the direction of evolution. Life was not a straight path. It was a constant struggle between adaptation and extinction. And so the final question of this scene becomes even more fascinating. Was Earth patiently preparing itself for complex life all along? Or was life simply adapting step by step to whatever the planet allowed at each stage? This silent world, though invisible in terms of large life forms, was actually one of the most important chapters in Earth's entire history. Because without this long, quiet phase of microscopic evolution, the world we see today would never have existed.